The coffee cup trembled slightly in Sarah's weathered hands as she approached table 7. Just another Tuesday morning at Murphy's Diner, just another customer asking for extra cream. But when the elderly man in the veteran's cap caught sight of the small tattoo peeking from beneath her rolled sleeve, the distinctive wings and anchor she thought no one would ever notice, everything changed. His eyes widened, his voice caught, and suddenly he was standing, his chair scraping against the worn linoleum. "Ma'am," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Were you a Marine?" What happened next would transform an ordinary breakfast shift into a moment that reminded everyone present that heroes walk among us, hidden in plain sight, serving coffee instead of country, but never truly leaving their duty behind. The morning rush at Murphy's Diner was like any other, steam rising from fresh coffee, the sizzle of bacon on the griddle, and the familiar chatter of regulars settling into their favorite booths. Sarah Martinez moved between the tables with practiced efficiency, her sneakers silent against the checkered linoleum floor. At 34, she had perfected the art of being invisible, of serving with a smile while keeping her story locked away. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her uniform, a basic black polo and khaki pants, revealed nothing of the woman beneath. She approached table 7 with a fresh pot of coffee, where an elderly man sat alone, studying the morning paper. His weathered hands bore the telltale spots of age, and a faded baseball cap with Vietnam veteran embroidered in gold letters sat beside his plate of untouched eggs. Frank Castellanos had been coming to Murphy's for 3 years, always ordering the same thing, always sitting in the same spot by the window where he could watch the world wake up. "More coffee, Mr. Castellanos?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone who had perfected customer service. As she leaned forward to refill his cup, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing a small but distinctive tattoo on her forearm, the unmistakable eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps, intertwined with the wings of a naval aviator. Frank's newspaper rustled as it slipped from his fingers, his pale blue eyes still sharp despite his 72 years, fixed on the ink that marked Sarah's skin. The coffee pot trembled almost imperceptibly in her hand as she noticed his stare. She quickly tugged her sleeve down, but it was too late. The recognition was already dawning in the old Marine's weathered face. "Ma'am," Frank's voice came out as barely more than a whisper, rough with sudden emotion. His breakfast forgotten, he set down his fork with deliberate care. Were you a Marine?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning that extended far beyond the simple words. Sarah's first instinct was to deflect, to smile politely and change the subject as she had done countless times before. She had spent 2 years perfecting the art of being just another waitress, of leaving Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, call sign Phoenix, buried somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, along with too many memories she wasn't ready to face. But something in Frank's eyes, a recognition that went deeper than curiosity, made her pause. She started, then stopped, glancing around the diner. Other customers were beginning to notice the strange tension at table 7. Mrs. Henderson looked up from her crossword puzzle, and Joe the truck driver paused mid-bite of his pancakes. Sarah felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't experienced since her last mission briefing. "I served," she finally admitted, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the restaurant. Frank's weathered hand moved slowly to his chest, pressing against his heart. "What branch? What was your MOS?" "Military occupational specialty," a question that cut straight to the heart of who she had been, what she had done in service to her country. Sarah's throat tightened. She could feel the weight of every eye in the diner now, though she knew that was probably her imagination. Still, the familiar anxiety crept up her spine, the same feeling she'd gotten before particularly dangerous missions. "Marines," she said quietly, then added with obvious reluctance. "I was a pilot, CH-53E Super Stallion, call sign Phoenix." The revelation hit Frank like a physical blow. A pilot. Not just any pilot, but a Marine aviator, one of the few, the proud, who had earned their wings through some of the most rigorous training in the world. His own memories came flooding back, watching helicopters disappear into hostile territory, knowing that somewhere up there, young Americans were risking everything to bring their brothers and sisters home safely. Afghanistan? he asked, though he already knew the answer from the distant look that had crept into Sarah's dark eyes. She nodded slowly, unconsciously straightening her shoulders in a way that revealed just a glimpse of the officer she had once been. 2 tours, medevac and transport missions mainly, got my people home. The simple statement carried the weight of countless night flights over enemy territory, of wounded Marines depending on her skill and courage to survive another day. Frank's eyes glistened with unshed tears. In this quiet waitress who had been serving him coffee and asking about his grandchildren for 3 years, he saw something he recognized, the carefully controlled bearing of someone who had seen too much, carried too much, and was still carrying it alone. He thought of his own homecoming from Vietnam, the protests and the cold shoulders, the way his own service had been something to hide rather than honor. Slowly, deliberately, Frank Castellanos rose from his seat. His 72-year-old frame straightened to attention with the muscle memory of a lifetime, and his right hand moved to his temple in a crisp, respectful salute. "Thank you for your service, Lieutenant," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent diner with the authority of a man who understood exactly what those words meant. The silence that followed Frank's salute seemed to stretch on forever, though it lasted only seconds. Sarah stood frozen, the coffee pot still in her hand, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and something deeper, a vulnerability she had kept carefully hidden beneath layers of civilian normalcy. She had grown used to being invisible, to moving through her days without anyone seeing past the uniform of Murphy's Diner to the uniform she had once worn with such pride. Frank remained at attention, his salute unwavering, his pale blue eyes locked on hers with an intensity that spoke of shared experience, of battles fought in different wars but under the same flag. The morning light streaming through the diner's windows seemed to spotlight the moment, casting everything else into soft shadows while highlighting the respect passing between 2 warriors separated by decades but united by service. Joe Martinez, no relation to Sarah, despite the shared surname, slowly set down his coffee cup at the counter. The 45-year-old truck driver had served 3 tours in Iraq with the Army's 82nd Airborne, and he recognized something sacred happening at table 7. His weathered hands, scarred from roadside bombs and desert wind, pushed against the counter as he rose to his feet. Without a word, his own hand moved to his temple in salute, his civilian clothes unable to hide the soldier's bearing that never truly leaves. Mrs. Henderson, an 80-year-old retired schoolteacher whose husband had died in Korea 60 years ago, looked up from her crossword puzzle with tears already forming in her eyes. She may not have served herself, but she understood sacrifice, understood the price that families paid when their loved ones answered the call to serve. Her arthritic hands trembled as she carefully set down her pencil and slowly, respectfully, stood from her booth. The wave of recce, cognition and respect spread through Murphy's Diner like a quiet storm. Maria Santos, a young mother having breakfast with her toddler son, stood up from her corner booth. Her brother had served with the Navy in the Gulf, and though she had never worn a uniform herself, she understood the debt owed to those who had. Her 3-year-old son, Miguel, looked up at his mother with curious eyes before standing on his chair, his small hand pressed against his heart in innocent mimicry of the solemnity surrounding him. Behind the grill, 60-year-old Bobby Chen set down his spatula and stepped out from behind the counter. The former Army medic who had served in the final years of Vietnam recognized something in Sarah's posture, in the way she held herself despite the civilian clothes and the coffee-stained apron. His own salute was sharp, precise, carrying with it the memory of treating wounded soldiers in field hospitals half a world away. Even Tommy Williams, the 18-year-old high school senior bussing tables to save money for college, stood up slowly. He had never served, never even considered military service until this moment, but something about the gravity of the scene, the obvious respect being shown to someone who had seemed like just another working person trying to make ends meet, made him understand that he was witnessing something important, something that demanded his respect, even if he didn't fully comprehend its depth. Sarah's hands began to shake as she looked around the diner, seeing face after face turn toward her with expressions of respect, gratitude, and recognition. The coffee pot slipped from her nerveless fingers, hitting the floor with a crash that seemed to echo through the silent restaurant. Hot coffee splashed across the linoleum, but no one moved to clean it up. No one looked away from the moment unfolding before them. Tears began to flow down Sarah's cheeks as the full weight of the moment hit her. For 2 years, she had carried the invisible burden of her service alone, never speaking of the missions that had earned her the Distinguished Flying Cross, never mentioning the 23 Marines she had pulled from hostile landing zones under enemy fire, never acknowledging the nightmares that still woke her in the cold hours before dawn. She had convinced herself that her service was something to be quietly proud of, but never discussed, that the civilian world had no place for Lieutenant Sarah Martinez and her war stories. But here, in this small-town diner filled with ordinary people living ordinary lives, she found something she had never expected, recognition not just of her service, but of her sacrifice. These people, young and old, veteran and civilian, from all walks of life, were standing not because they had to, but because they understood that freedom isn't free. That the quiet waitress who had been serving their coffee and remembering their orders had once risked everything to serve something greater than herself. Frank's voice, strong despite his years, cut through the emotional silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his salute still crisp, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "I'd like you to meet Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, United States Marine Corps, call sign Phoenix. She flew medevac and transport missions in Afghanistan, bringing our heroes home safe, when no one else could." His voice cracked slightly on the last words, but he pressed on. "She's been serving us coffee for 3 years, but before that, she served our country with honor, courage, and commitment." The applause began slowly, hesitantly, with Mrs. Henderson's weathered hands coming together in a soft rhythm that gradually grew stronger as others joined in. But this wasn't the casual applause of entertainment or politics. This was something deeper, more reverent. It was the sound of gratitude made manifest, of a community recognizing one of its own heroes who had been hiding in plain sight. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her shoulders straightening unconsciously as something inside her began to heal. For the first time since hanging up her flight suit, she felt seen, truly seen for who she had been and who she still was beneath the civilian clothes and the everyday struggles of post-military life. As the applause gradually faded and the customers of Murphy's Diner slowly returned to their seats, something had fundamentally changed in that small space. Sarah Martinez was no longer just a waitress. She was a recognized hero, a veteran whose service had been acknowledged and honored by her community. The invisible burden she had carried alone was now shared, understood, and respected by people who might never fully comprehend the weight of what she had experienced, but who recognized its value nonetheless. Frank Castellanos sat back down at table 7, but his relationship with the woman who brought his coffee would never be the same. Neither would Sarah's relationship with herself. Sometimes recognition comes not from medals or ceremonies, but from a simple moment of understanding between people who recognize that heroism often wears civilian clothes and carries coffee pots instead of weapons. Heroes walk among us every day, veterans who have served with honor and returned to civilian life, carrying their experiences quietly while they rebuild their lives in communities across America. They're our neighbors, our co-workers, the people who serve our food and teach our children and protect our streets. They ask for nothing more than the chance to continue serving, in whatever way they can, the country and communities they love. Today, we honor not just Sarah Martinez and Frank Castellanos, but all the quiet heroes who have worn our nation's uniform and who continue to serve in countless ways long after they've hung up their military clothes. Their stories matter, their sacrifices have meaning, and their service deserves our recognition and gratitude. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the heroes in your own community, please subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage, sacrifice, and the remarkable people who make our freedom possible. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that heroism comes in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest honor we can give our veterans is simply seeing them, truly seeing them, for who they are and what they've given for all of us. Remember, freedom isn't free, and the price has been paid by people like Sarah Martinez, heroes who continue to serve even when no one is watching.